Cain was utterly taken aback by his cousin's bold statement about teaching him a lesson, his brow arching in surprise. Cecil stood before him, calmly rolling up his left sleeve, explaining that Cain stood no chance against his sword. That was why, he said, it would be better to switch to a good old-fashioned fistfight. After all, that was Cain's forte. Cain, however, felt both insulted and confused. Cecil had always been quiet, respectful, and obedient. For as long as Cain could remember, Cecil had walked behind him, never dared to argue, and certainly never looked him in the eye the way he did now. But here he was, standing tall, unshaken, calmly stating that his swordsmanship was far superior to Cain's. It was an unexpected and jarring shift in their relationship, something that rattled Cain to his core. And then, as if to deepen the insult, Cecil suggested a handicap, one that gave Cain the advantage. He proposed they fight barehanded, without swords, an announcement that shocked everyone. It was common knowledge that Cain was physically stronger and had far more experience in brawling. It seemed as though Cecil was willingly placing himself at a disadvantage, and no one could understand why. Just as the crowd struggled to process this unexpected twist, Cecil added even more tension to the moment by doubling the bet. He offered to raise the stakes by another 1,000 gold coins, confidently declaring that he would win. His bold statement only fueled the confusion and excitement rippling through the arena. The crowd was stunned. Whispers spread like wildfire as spectators tried to make sense of Cecil's behavior. Some thought he had lost his mind, while others believed he must have some clever strategy they couldn't yet see. Hidden among them, a spy watched with wide eyes and a pounding heart, utterly shocked by Cecil's courage. He couldn't believe the young noble had the nerve to stand against Cain like this. Still, the spy felt a secret thrill. Perhaps Cecil's apparent recklessness would open a window of opportunity he could exploit. As preparations resumed and tension thickened in the air, a rotund merchant leapt to his feet, waving his arms and calling out to the crowd to place new bets, now that the match had shifted to a barehanded duel. He shouted odds and numbers, his voice booming as he stoked the crowd's growing anticipation. The arena erupted into chaos. Some laughed mockingly, predicting Cecil would be crushed within minutes, while others began to cheer for him, swept up in the possibility that he might somehow pull off the impossible. The atmosphere buzzed with a strange blend of ridicule and hope. Cain, still stunned and struggling to believe what was happening, stared at his cousin in disbelief. After a tense moment, he angrily shrugged off his coat and drew his sword, refusing to fight without it. His pride had been bruised in front of too many eyes. "I'll still use my weapon," he declared, his voice sharp with indignation. "Even if you won't." From the sidelines, Belinda, her heart in her throat, called out in desperation. She cared deeply for Cecil, and her voice cracked as she begged him to pick up a weapon before it was too late. Her hands trembled, her plea thick with fear. Cecil stood calmly, showing no fear. He didn't even flinch. As Cain charged forward, swinging his sword with full force, Cecil ducked swiftly. He moved with astonishing speed, dropping low to the ground and avoiding the deadly blade with practiced ease. It was as if he had predicted every move. Then, in a single fluid motion, he slipped to Cain's side and delivered a sharp punch to his thigh. The impact made Cain stagger. Before Cain could recover, Cecil followed up with a powerful uppercut to the jaw, knocking him backward. Cain hit the ground hard, dazed and confused. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The cousin he had always seen as weak had just overpowered him in front of everyone. The crowd roared in disbelief, gasping and shouting as the tide of the fight suddenly shifted. No longer certain who would win, all eyes were locked on Cecil, who now stood tall above his fallen opponent. Calmly, he told Cain to get up, his voice cool and steady, without a trace of arrogance. Burning with rage and humiliation, Cain scrambled to his feet and charged again, swinging his sword in wild, furious arcs. But Cecil remained unshaken. He dodged every blow effortlessly, watching Cain's movements like a seasoned fighter who had waited his entire life for this moment. Then, with perfect timing, Cecil grabbed Cain's arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him to the ground. The sound of Cain hitting the arena floor echoed through the crowd, followed by a sharp gasp as Cecil drove his knee into Cain's ribs. Cain coughed violently, blood spilling from his mouth. Stunned and breathless, Cain couldn't understand what was happening. Nothing made sense anymore. How was Cecil doing this? How was the boy he had mocked for years, the boy who had always obeyed orders and lowered his head, now dominating him without even wielding a weapon? Memories flashed through Cain's mind, giving commands, laughing at Cecil's silence, never once seeing him as an equal. Even now, his pride refused to accept it. He still believed the fight should be his to win, something quick and easy, meant to secure his future and prove his strength. But Cecil didn't stop. Blow after blow rained down with surgical precision. Each strike was clean, powerful, and filled with purpose. It was clear that Cecil had trained for this, prepared for this reckoning with unshakable intent. He gave Cain no chance to breathe, no time to recover. By the time Cecil finally stepped back, Cain was barely conscious. His face was swollen and bruised, his body trembling and broken. The once proud fighter lay shattered in front of everyone. Then Cecil reached down, grabbed Cain by the hair, and lifted his head. But there was no cruelty in his gaze, only a quiet, weary sadness. He spoke with calm gravity, telling Cain that he pitied his father, Count Logis, a nobleman who had once sacrificed everything to support the Perdium family in their time of need. He reminded Cain that it was his father who had stood by House Perdium, even when it nearly ruined him. That, Cecil said quietly, is loyalty. That is honor. But Cain, unlike his father, had turned his back on those values. He had become arrogant, selfish, and cruel. As Cecil's words echoed in his ears, Cain's mind drifted back to a moment from years ago. He had argued with his father, demanding to know why they continued sending aid to House Perdium when their own land was struggling. He hadn't understood it then. To him, it seemed like weakness, foolishness. But now, lying beaten and humiliated, he finally began to see. Honor wasn't about power. It was about sacrifice, about standing by the people who mattered, even when it was difficult, about doing what was right, even when no one else stood with you. And for the first time, Cain realized just how far he had strayed from what truly mattered. Now, as the memory faded, Cain snapped back to the present, just in time to see Cecil's fist arcing toward his face. He instinctively shut his eyes, bracing himself for the final blow, expecting pain. But the strike never came. Instead, Cecil stopped his fist just inches away and told Cain that it was over, that enough had been done. Cain slowly opened his eyes, surprised, and saw something he never thought he would see. Cecil's hand extended toward him, offering to help him stand. It was not a gesture of triumph, but of forgiveness and grace. In that moment, the heavy weight of Cain's pride began to crumble. Overwhelmed by emotions he had long buried, he lowered his head and softly admitted defeat. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd before erupting into thunderous cheers and applause. The audience, once divided, now stood united in celebrating Cecil's unexpected and dramatic victory. They chanted his name with joy, thrilled by the outcome they hadn't dared to hope for. Those who had bet on Cain groaned in frustration, their faces filled with disbelief, while those who had placed their hopes on Cecil jumped and shouted in excitement, clapping and cheering without restraint. Amidst all the joyful noise, Elena stood with a bright, proud smile, watching her brother with admiration. Belinda and the two soldiers, Ricardo and Scovan, remained frozen, eyes wide, mouths slightly open in shock. None of them had expected the fight to end like this. Just then, the crowd parted as the furious spy pushed through, red-faced and seething. He stormed onto the stage, shouting at Cain in front of everyone. His voice rang out loud and sharp, laced with rage, as he demanded to know why Cain had surrendered so easily, after what he called a mere setback. He reminded Cain that people had placed their trust in him, that he had been given an important mission others were counting on him to complete, to win, and to prove himself. But Cain didn't argue. He didn't make excuses. In a quiet but steady voice, he he simply replied that he was done, and added that it was time to leave. The spy stood stunned, completely taken aback. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He hadn't expected Kane to walk away so calmly, so decisively. As the spy stood there fuming, Cecil, now fully in control of the moment and radiating calm confidence, turned to him with a mischievous glint in his eye and a relaxed smile. Looking out over the audience, Cecil raised his voice and cheerfully declared that the spy had graciously volunteered to pay for everyone's food and drinks to celebrate the occasion. The crowd burst into laughter and cheerful applause. They shouted Cecil's name again, calling him the best and thanking him loudly for the unexpected treat. The spy, caught completely off guard, raised his hands in protest and shouted that he had never agreed to such a thing. But Cecil simply walked over and stood beside him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. In a calm but serious voice, he reminded the spy that this was all part of the bet they had made earlier. He assured him that the food and drink wouldn't be taken from the general betting pot, but instead would be a personal thank you gift from the spy himself. Then Cecil's grip on the spy's shoulder tightened slightly as he leaned in closer and lowered his voice, his tone turning stern. He reminded the spy that the wager now included an extra 1,000 gold coins on top of the original bet, and warned him not to even think about running away or avoiding payment. The cold edge in Cecil's voice made it unmistakably clear. There would be serious consequences if the spy tried to escape his responsibility. The spy, now realizing he had no other option and sensing the quiet threat behind Cecil's calm demeanor, dropped to his knees in defeat. His pride shattered. He gave a stiff nod and agreed to pay the full amount, fully aware that refusing could very well cost him his life. The crowd roared even louder, delighted and amused by how everything had played out. The very next day, the scene shifted to a quieter, more reflective moment inside Cecil's room. The wild noise of the crowd was gone. On a sturdy wooden table sat a large box, which Cecil slowly opened to reveal a shimmering pile of gold coins. The warm light of the room made the treasure gleam brightly, the golden glow reflecting softly off the walls. Cecil stared at the money in disbelief and quiet awe. It was more than he had expected, enough to hire a small army, fund a major campaign, or secure powerful allies. He gently closed the lid, releasing a slow breath as his expression turned serious. He understood that victories like this would not come often. This was a rare opportunity, and he knew his enemies would not remain quiet for long. If he wanted to stay ahead, he would need to act quickly and with care. As his thoughts swirled, he noticed Elena and Belinda standing nearby, both watching him with curious eyes. Unsure why they were staring at him like that, Cecil gave a nervous little laugh and asked if something was wrong. Elena, still smiling, asked in a half-playful tone what her brother planned to do with all that money. Cecil chuckled and teased back, asking if she wanted a share. Elena laughed and shook her head, saying she was just curious and wanted to know his plans. That was when Belinda jumped in, bold as always. She grinned and declared confidently that she already knew exactly what Cecil planned to do with the money. With a smirk and a teasing tone, she reminded him that Lady Amelia's birthday was coming up soon. She joked that he had gone through all this trouble, staging a dramatic fight, winning the prize, and putting on a grand performance, just to buy a lavish gift to impress Amelia. She winked and added that she could always guess her master's plans. Elena turned to Cecil in surprise, her eyes wide as she asked if it was true, if he had really done all this just to impress his fiancée. Cecil blinked, confused and completely caught off guard, as though he had just been told something he didn't know himself, that he even had a fiancée at all. Cecil turned to his sister with a puzzled expression, clearly baffled by her words. He raised an eyebrow and asked what she meant, his tone genuinely curious. He had no idea what she was talking about and was plainly seeking answers. Belinda, however, only chuckled and shot him a sidelong glance, clearly amused by his confusion. She told him to stop pretending, insisting there was no need to act clueless just because he might be feeling a little embarrassed. Elena, meanwhile, closed her eyes and let out a weary sigh, clearly unimpressed, before softly reminding her brother that they were talking about Count Leipold's daughter, Amelia. The moment the name of the county passed her lips, Cecil's entire mood shifted. His expression darkened like a storm cloud rolling in, and his eyes narrowed with sharp intensity, as if he had just remembered something painful. The name Amelia Leipold was one Cecil could never forget, not even for a moment. He remembered her vividly, a noble woman who, at one time, had been admired across the lands for her graceful beauty, acts of charity, and her seemingly kind and gentle heart. People in her region adored her, calling her an angel and praising her selfless spirit. She had a strong reputation, and many believed she would bring peace and prosperity to the county. But Cecil knew the truth behind the mask. To him, Amelia was not a gentle lady at all. She was a spider hiding in the shadows, spinning traps for anyone foolish enough to trust her. In the years that followed, she rose as one of the key figures behind a deadly rebellion, secretly aligning herself with Duke Delphine to strike a powerful and devastating blow against Perdium, Cecil's homeland. Her betrayal led to great loss and sorrow, and for that, she earned the chilling nickname, the Witch of the North. In Cecil's eyes, she was a traitor who wore a beautiful face and spoke kind words only to conceal her cruel intentions. As these painful thoughts came rushing back into his mind, a faint and bitter smile touched the corner of his lips. It wasn't a smile of joy, but one born of sadness and old scars. Letting out a small sigh, Cecil quietly changed the subject. He casually asked Belinda when their father was expected to return, shifting the conversation as if the name Amelia hadn't just stirred up deep emotions. Belinda, unaware of the storm brewing in his heart, answered that his father, the Lord, would be home in a week's time. Cecil nodded thoughtfully, his mind already working through a plan. That would be just enough time, he said in a quiet, serious tone. Then he rose from his seat and announced his decision to travel to Leipold County. Belinda blinked in surprise, confused by his sudden declaration. She reminded him that it wasn't Amelia's birthday yet, and asked what business he had there, if not to attend the celebration. Cecil replied simply that he wasn't going to see Amelia or to offer gifts. He was going to secure funds, not directly from Amelia, but from the resources of the county itself. How he planned to do that, he did not say, keeping his intentions hidden. Somewhere deep within the county of Amelia's territory, a beautiful noblewoman stood beneath the sunlight, her golden hair fluttering gently in the cold, soft breeze as she set her shoes upon the tender earth. She was a vision to behold, with piercing red eyes and an unusual mark near her mouth, a delicate spider-shaped emblem that only heightened her air of mystery. This was Amelia Leipold. Her appearance was regal and graceful, but there was something intimidating about her. Before her stood a ragged little girl, frozen in place by shock and nervousness. Amelia knelt gracefully, extending the girl's shoes toward her with a soft, almost teasing smile curving her lips. All around, the townsfolk began to gather, their curious eyes fixed on the scene. The child trembled, her voice barely a whisper as she asked if the gift was truly meant for her. Amelia answered coolly, yet with a poetic lilt, declaring that if anyone in her lands must walk without shoes, it should be her alone, hinting at wounds from her own past and a resolve that no one else should suffer as she had. Her words carried beauty, but an undercurrent of unease lingered. Then, with a sudden decisive turn toward her soldiers, she issued a cold, commanding order: provide food and shelter for the townsfolk. Without hesitation, the soldiers obeyed, distributing bread, clothing, and supplies to the poor. The crowd looked on in awe, astonished by her generosity. Gratitude mixed with uncertainty. Was her kindness sincere, or a calculated move to tighten her hold over them? No one could say for certain, and that very ambiguity only deepened the air of power that surrounded her. Amelia moved away with effortless grace, her bare feet touching the earth as her soldiers followed in disciplined silence. Behind her, voices rose in gratitude, yet beneath the thanks lingered an unspoken question. Should they revere her? Or should they fear her? In the lush, tranquil gardens of Leywin Manor, tucked away in a shaded corner, Amelia sat in serene stillness while a man knelt before her, carefully washing her feet with reverence. This was Bernaf, her devoted escort knight, a man who had served her faithfully for many years. Lifting his head, he offered her a warm smile and remarked that she had done well today with the poor girl in town. A soft, purring cat sat nearby on the table as Amelia stroked its fur absent-mindedly. With a distant, thoughtful tone, she spoke about her father. She recalled how her father had always believed the people of the land should obey their lord without question, seeing it as a natural order. But Amelia held different beliefs. She felt that people would follow anyone who gave them warmth, food, and hope, someone who treated them as humans, not tools. Bernaf nodded in approval, praising her sharp mind and keen insight. He remarked that the townspeople were now on her side, a factor certain to work in her favor when the time came to choose the next successor. For a moment, Amelia simply stared at Bernaf, her expression carrying a hint of irritation, as though his words had displeased her. Amelia responded by abruptly slamming her foot against his face, the sharp smack failing to make Bernaf so much as flinch. Growing more serious, she then demanded a report on the recent duel between two of the North's greatest swordsmen. Bernaf lowered his head in sincere apology, her foot still pressed against his face, and explained that he had deliberately thrown the fight. Winning, he said, would have drawn dangerous attention, jeopardizing their carefully laid plans. If he stood in the spotlight, she would inevitably be dragged into it as well. Gently, he took her foot from his face, though his hand lingered upon it, his tone steady as he reminded her that now was not the time to act openly. Revealing their full strength too soon could destroy everything. In a final gesture of loyalty and devotion, he bowed lower and pressed a kiss to her foot, swearing that his sword would forever be hers to command. Amelia listened, but did not let the moment pass quietly. She leaned forward, her voice turning cold and sharp like a blade. She reminded Bernaf that he no longer had the luxury of choice. He was her blade, her creation. She had shaped him, trained him, and invested everything in turning him into the perfect weapon. Weakness or failure, she said, would not be tolerated. Her eyes gleamed with quiet menace, sending a clear warning. Breaking her gaze from him, she let the matter drop and shifted the conversation. This time, it was Bernaf who asked about the company. Amelia answered with calm assurance, telling him there was no need to concern himself with the Actium Company. All the materials House Perdium was using to rebuild the Monster Forest outpost, destroyed by the orcs, were being purchased through their company. A sly smirk curved Bernaf's lips. They were, in effect, siphoning nearly all the funds Count Leipold sent to Perdium each year. It was a scheme as profitable as it was brilliant. Bernaf added that they were also recruiting seasoned soldiers and knights who had recently left Perdium, fighters with real battlefield experience, especially against savage barbarian tribes. These men would be valuable in strengthening Amelia's hidden army. Pleased with these developments, Amelia leaned back in her garden chair, her tone cool but firm, as she reminded Bernaf once again of the importance of secrecy in their plans. She stressed that no matter how carefully they prepared their ambitions, everything could collapse if even a single part of their scheme was exposed too soon. Power, she explained with calm certainty, had to be built slowly and quietly, brick by brick, layer by layer, until it stood strong and unshakable. While she spoke with quiet authority, a steward cautiously stepped into the garden, breaking the intense moment. Bernaf immediately stood, visibly irritated by the interruption. His voice grew sharper as he demanded to know who had allowed the steward to enter such a private meeting without prior permission. But the steward, staying calm, bowed respectfully and explained that he came with an urgent message from the estate's front gate. Lord Cecil Perdium had arrived and was requesting an audience. Amelia blinked in surprise, clearly caught off guard. Of all people, she did not expect him to come here, certainly not unannounced. Her eyes narrowed slightly with suspicion, and she asked what reason Cecil had given for this unexpected visit. The steward replied that Cecil claimed he had come to speak about matters related to the Merchant Guild. Both Amelia and Bernaf exchanged puzzled glances, their brows furrowed. This visit was highly unusual and raised several questions, as neither of them could think of a reason why Cecil would personally bring himself to their doorstep. Inside the richly decorated room, Amelia entered with the same elegance and poise that earned her admiration across the region, though her posture was noticeably guarded. She sat gracefully across from Cecil, who was dressed in a rugged travel coat, clearly not prepared for diplomacy or formal visits. His rough appearance made it clear that this was not a casual social call. In his hand, Cecil held a small, delicate flower, greeting Amelia with a polite tone and words of respect. Amelia's expression immediately hardened. The white cat resting on her lap hissed at Cecil, clearly sharing her displeasure. She chastised him for arriving without notice, calling his actions improper and unbecoming of a noble. Her voice was sharp as she pointed out his lack of manners, her irritation plain to see. All the while she stroked her soft, furious cat, trying to calm it. But Cecil remained calm, a faint smile playing on his lips as he explained that he had come to deliver an early birthday gift. With a gentle motion, he set the flower on the table and spoke of its soft, pleasant scent. He said the flower symbolized sincerity and honesty, and mentioned that he had purchased it from a nearby merchant guild. Casually, he added that he intended to keep buying flowers from them, revealing the guild's name, the Actium Merchant Guild, clearly aiming to provoke her. Amelia listened carefully, though her expression showed clear confusion. She could not yet see where he was going with this conversation. Rising from her seat, she politely stated that now that the gift had been delivered, there was no longer any reason for her to stay. She turned away and said that she would take her leave now that she had received his gift. But just as she stepped toward the door, Cecil's voice rang out again. This time it was different. His tone was cold, sharp, and commanding. He told her to sit back down, and the words hung heavily in the air. The room fell silent. There was no trace of the timid, hesitant boy she once remembered. His voice carried strength and confidence. For a brief moment, Amelia was genuinely startled. Her heart skipped a beat. The Cecil she knew in the past was quiet, soft-spoken, and barely capable of holding her gaze. But the man sitting before her now was composed, fearless, and completely in control. Slowly, Amelia turned and sat back down. Cecil lifted his teacup, stared into it for a moment, and then spoke again in a calm and deliberate voice. He said that he had not come to waste time or play games. He needed 10,000 gold. Amelia stared at him in disbelief, struggling to process what she had just heard. The amount was enormous, far too large for a simple request. She scolded him for arriving unannounced and demanding so much money from his fiancée. She asked if his father had approved it, trying to determine if the Lord of Perdium had sent him. But Cecil shook his head and clarified that his father had no involvement. He had come entirely of his own accord. Then, with a slight and unsettling smile, he slowly tipped the teacup, letting the tea spill onto the floor between them. He looked up at her and said in a quiet but firm voice that she had never intended to marry him. The words struck Amelia like a sudden slap. She froze for a moment, her breath caught in her throat. Cecil mocked her, saying that it might be possible for Amelia to marry whoever she wanted if she succeeded her father's title. She could even marry that so-called lapdog Bernaf who stood just outside the door. Cecil went on, revealing that he was well aware of her secret plans, the way she had been quietly gathering resources, growing her power behind the scenes, and preparing for a future where she would rise as her father's successor. He warned her that if even a whisper of those secrets reached the wrong ears, everything she had worked for could fall apart. The public would turn against her. Nobles would distance themselves. Her carefully built image as a benevolent and wise leader would be shattered. As tension thickened the air, Amelia's cat leapt onto the table and hissed at Cecil, sensing the looming danger. Amelia let out a dry, humorless laugh and dismissed Cecil's remarks as little more than a poorly crafted threat. She warned him to refrain from making such comments, even in jest. But Cecil stood his ground. Leaning forward slightly, he said he had no interest in exposing her, at least, not yet. Yet his silence came at a cost. If he left empty-handed, he could not promise to keep her secrets safe. At that, Amelia's eyes turned icy and her polite mask fell away. She gave a cold, confident smile and assured him that such a situation would never happen. Without hesitation, she called out for Burnaf. Her loyal knight entered the room swiftly, placing one hand on his chest in respect while his sharp eyes studied Cecil with quiet suspicion. Cecil recognized him immediately. Burnaf was no ordinary knight. He was Amelia's closest protector and one of the best swordsmen in the north, known for his skill, discipline, and deadly efficiency. Still seated, Cecil met Amelia's gaze and gave her a final warning. He calmly said that if he died there that day, it would not be the end of the matter. His death would be seen as an attack, and it would spark a war, one Amelia might not be ready to fight. He then asked whether she could really handle that, his tone steady. Amelia did not blink. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his, and replied in a voice as cold as steel that if a ruffian stormed into her home, made demands, and threatened violence, and was killed by her knight, then that was the story the world would hear. With that, she turned her head and gave the order to kill him, her voice unwavering. A devilish smile curled on her lips as she lightly touched the spider-shaped mark near her mouth. Without hesitation, Burnaf drew his sword, the metallic ring of the blade echoing through the chamber. The time for talk was over. Cecil remained perfectly still for a moment, not flinching. Then, as the gravity of the moment settled in, he slowly reached for the hilt of his blade. His eyes did not move from Burnaf's. He knew that now, to survive, he had no choice but to fight.